Okay, thanks for coming today, everybody, for another recording session for ChefConf Online, today with Mark Gibbons. If you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the Q&A module that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. And take it away, Mark.
Hi, welcome to ChefConf. Hope you're having fun. I have been. We're going to talk about Chef Server API today, and we'll get right into what a user sees when they try to use Chef. So, Rachel's a first-time Chef user. She's really a composite of a whole bunch of users that I have, but we'll put a face on her. She's new to Chef, and she has a list of servers that her team owns. She knows she can find the servers' names by looking them up in ServerNow in the configuration database, but ServiceNow doesn't know anything about Chef infra nodes or organizations or users. Users get access to Chef by being added to Okta, and they know they can log into Chef Manage, which creates a user for them and gives them some other options. So let's see what happens when Rachel logs into Chef Manage and tries to use Chef. She gets this screen, which is an interesting one. She wants to manage a server called Red0015, but there's no indication here where she's going to find that. She knows it's in a Chef organization, so she looks at this screen and tries to figure out what to do. First thing that I've noticed about all users is they ignore the writing, which is actually the important part. It gets a firm TLDR. There's only one live button, so Rachel clicks it. She creates a new organization. Takes her probably 5 to 10 minutes to figure out she can't do anything with that new organization she's created, at least nothing useful. Thing I've observed is that the 30% of the smartest users, they all click that button. So after Rachel gets done playing with this, logs in 3 or 4 times, maybe creates a couple of different organizations, she realized she's got no easy way from the screen to find the server and organization. She's got no way to get a list of organizations, and she probably needs an organization admin to do something for her, but there's no list of those people. And even if she finds an organization admin, they're probably busy, and they may not want to be doing things like inviting users. Rachel ends up here with her workflow depending on responses from other people. It's partly due to the way the Chef Manage works, and it's partly due to how Chef was implemented where she works. And reasonable choices were made in both situations, but it's not a great outcome. This is my standard Chef learning curve slide. It's my wife going up that slope. It's a half mile down on the left, and it's a full mile down on the right. A lot of fun, but that's about what using Chef feels like to a lot of people at the first time. I think we can make that easier. So here's what we're going to try to cover in this presentation. Rachel trying to use Chef. She tries, but she gets stopped by some obstacles on the very first screen. And during this talk, we'll see how we can use Chef Server to make that initial process easier. We can get around those obstacles. And the solutions presented here use the Chef Infra Server API to provide services that really aren't easily available to unauthorized Chef users. Most of the issues Rachel runs into are caused by the corporate environment that she's running in. We'll look at what corporate environment restrictions caused her to run into this. What you have in your shop will probably differ, but they may cause you problems too. And the API is good for solving a lot of weird issues. I've got some demonstration applications that actually walk through using the API. We'll walk through those and show what Rachel can do to get around these types of problems. We'll look at the Chef Server API documentation, find it, show how to use it. It's a little obscure in places, and there's points to make there. We'll show you some basics of using the Chef Server API. It's not terribly complex. It has some quirks, and we'll go over a few of those. We'll look at the different server API client packages. People have written packages in Go, Ruby, Python, and there's a couple others. We'll talk about those. If you want to talk about more of this afterwards, I'm on Slack. I've also got links to my repositories with all the demo code and the source materials. These slides will be on GitHub in a few minutes after the presentation is done. So let's get Rachel started. What Rachel needs to do is log into something that will give her access to things. We'll log into the demo application. We'll create a Chef Infra user for her. We'll find her node. We'll find her organization. We'll join her to the organization. And then we'll change the node attributes to let it do something useful. I'm going to branch into the live demo here. And let's hope it works. So this is the demo applications. We've got a few options here. We can log in. We're going to log in with external authentication. This is not Chef authentication. So think of this as a plugin for Okta. We'll get a JSON web token, and we'll be able to use that to authenticate to the other applications. Nodes applications let me do things with nodes. Users lets me do things with organizations and users. Let's log in. We're going to log in as Rachel. Password for the demo is PA for all users. We sign in. Hey, it worked. Rachel wants to find node red 0015. Okay, well, we can get a node list of all of the nodes in all of the organizations in this Chef server. It's more than I want to look through, so let's go find it. Okay, so she's in organization main app and server red 0015. If we look at the detail on that server, you can see it's still in the default environment, and she wants it to be in the production environment and possibly to have a run list of something. So let's go set Rachel up in Chef so maybe she can do something. So she wants to be in the main app organization. If we look at the list of users in Chef, well, Arlene, Dwan, Fred, Pivotal, and Sue are there, but I don't see Rachel anywhere. So let's create her. We can come over to create a Chef user. Whoops, I guess we need to set the display name and the email values. Okay. And we could add first name, last name, there's a few other attributes, but that's all we really need to use. When you create a Chef user, does the standard thing, hands you back a private key. That thing needs to be copied out, saved. It's your PEM file that you'll use for other interactions with Chef. All standard stuff so far. The user list shows all the users. The org user list shows all the users in all the organizations. If we think there's too many of those, we could filter that down a bit and see just main app. Say, okay, she's not in there. So we can come over here, add Rachel, add user to an organization, add her, and Rachel's now part of that organization. She can contribute cookbooks to it, do all sorts of things with nodes and things. Rachel's part of that. We can go back into nodes, find red 15. I'm still logged in as Rachel. Change that to production. Update the node. And you can see we changed Rachel to production. This little set of apps replaces a lot of what my company does on Chef Manage. Interesting things, for the most part, are inviting users, adding them to organizations, doing a little bit of changing of attributes. So what did we just do? We logged in using external authentication. We did a login, we created a token, we verified the user against an external server. That external server could be Okta, it could be something else, it could be some two-factor authentication thing that you have. The application is using HTML, JavaScript, and CSS to present the web interface. That REST interface it uses could also be called by curl. You don't need to use the web front end. All the REST interfaces here could be called by any type of program. For our purposes of this demo, the JWT lives unreasonably long and doesn't get refreshed, but that could be changed if you wanted to fix the code. So we're going to use the node application to find Rachel's server and find the related organization. Same pages that we showed. Rachel's looking for red 15. We've got a few organizations. We narrowed the search down. This page calls the nodes application, the REST interface. It's written in Go. It calls the Chef server REST API to get lists of organizations and nodes. You notice this was a self-service join of an organization. She didn't need to get an invitation. That works for parts of my environment. I'll explain why later. If we needed to, though, we could have found an admin user. We'd come back over here to see the users. We could have pulled the admin list down, and it shows the admins for each organization. So that first step, Rachel wasn't a Chef user. Now she is. She has a private key. She can log in, do all the types of things that a Chef user should be able to do. The user's application also is Go. It's Go client. It uses the Go Chef client API to send REST requests to the Chef server. The user applications and the node applications run with super user credentials. They're actually using Pivotal as the user ID and using the Pivotal PEM file to make their calls. One thing to note is that without Chef Manage creating these users, the best I've found for creating users is to have an admin log into the Chef server and run Chef server cuddle commands to add new users. You could also have some admin who's authorized enough can run knife OPC commands, I believe. But both of those involve getting someone pretty authorized to do something that's really trivial, and Chef Manage used to just provide. The fact that Chef Manage is deprecated, and in my shop we plan to retire because we don't want to run it anymore, really made us want to be able to use some of these things. Managing Chef users, we can add a user to a group. we could create a user. In this case, we add Rachel to main app. The reason we can add Rachel to main app and let it be a self-service thing is that main app is a read-only organization. That means that any changes to it happen through a separate CI/CD pipeline. So letting Rachel have read access really doesn't matter as far as security is concerned. And she's already authenticated, and she's in we have a external authorization on this that checks to see whether she's actually allowed to join main app. For instance, she's not allowed to join the admin application or organization. She is allowed to join the main app application. We've got three options under list users. User list shows all the users. Org admin list shows the admins, and user list for the orgs shows the orgs in each organization. You can filter those lists if you need to. The demo code doesn't handle nested groups. I have another organization that's actually running in production that deals with this. I didn't add it for the demos though. And then Rachel goes in, edits the node. These are essentially all the things that you could edit. API call extracts the information, hands it back in JSON to the JavaScript application running in the browser, which formats it out, and then sends it back as a JSON body to do the updates. So let's talk about the environment. I'll also talk a little bit about my background here. I'm Mark Gibbons on GitHub and Slack if you need to look up something. I've been a Chef Infra user for almost 8 years now, full 7. I support the Chef environment at Nordstrom. Pretty much been in charge of it for the last 3 or 4 years. I'm a sous chef member. I actively support the Line, Vagrant, Vow Utils, and ChefDK Bootstrap public cookbooks. At this point, I've written several hundred cookbooks to configure servers and many library cookbooks to provide chef resources. Only a few of those library cookbooks actually made it into the open source world, partly because I can't support any more than what I've already published. I've run into Rachel's problems repeatedly with multiple users, which is why we needed a solution. What I noticed was that none of the existing API clients managed users and organization at the global level. They all managed things like nodes and clients at the organization level, but if you go on up one level in Chef, they just don't deal with that. The Go Chef repository looked like it was maintainable and extendable. And our company standards said you can't write APIs in Ruby. So we used the Go Chef API. I got push permission for that fairly quickly. And I continue to support it by adding missing endpoints and getting merge requests from Chef itself and from the community. I've been working on Go Chef for about a year now, and PRs for that are pretty evenly split between Go Chef and the Chef server API documentation. The API documentation, when I started on it, was about 4 to 7 years out of date. And as I wrote tests for Go Chef against a real Chef server, I submitted PRs to the API documentation. Submitted about 30 pull requests at this point for that. It's been interesting. Company background. We have a lot of requirements for security, PCI, PII, HIPAA, SOC. Access controls and auditing need to be in place for all of those. Servers for those applications with those requirements, though, share a Chef server organization. That requires some compartmentalization inside that organization. It requires that organization be fairly well controlled. We do that by making it read-only so people can't change arbitrary things inside the organization. But then we let people change things using pipelines, which use external authorization to let people decide, to just make the decisions about what things people can change. We have about 1,000+ people in technology, and that means finding the right person that can do something for you is difficult. Sometimes we have 100+ chef organizations. So finding an admin or finding the organization you want to use can be a challenge. The developers and platform people using Chef average about 2 years of experience. So they're not very experienced with this, and there's a fairly high level of turnover. So we use read-only organizations for teams that don't want or need the full Chef experience. Servers are configured using Chef Info Client, and the applications interact with Chef as much as they want via application cookbooks. Pipelines manage promoting cookbooks and other Chef objects. And we've got about 10,000 to 60,000 nodes, depending on the month. Very few people are admins for these read-only organizations, though. And the central Chef team handles most of the administration work. We've got about 250 people using Chef, maybe 100 applications sitting inside these read-only organizations. Access to Chef Cookbook management is partitioned by external security. So to be able to promote something, you actually have to be in a table that manages things by cookbook name mostly, and you have to be authorized to do things. A lot of that authorization is done by being a part of an Active Directory group. Access to node management is also partitioned by external security. We use ServiceNow. Joining a read-only organization is open to everybody, and this type of authorization where people can self-service would make that a lot easier for everybody. So for most of these people using the read-only organizations, Chef has to be simple to use because they don't have time to learn it well or to use it very much. The process to use and run cookbooks, well, people usually test it on Vagrant and VirtualBox. They add a cookbook to Chef by using a merge to master, which launches a pipeline and then pushes the cook to Chef server. They add a cookbook to the run list with an application that checks to see whether they're authorized to change the node. And they promote a cookbook through the environments from development, test, staging, production by using a pipeline. Most of the servers are assigned organizations and environments. I commonly use models that we have 2 cookbooks for every server. We'll have something like a Unix-based cookbook and an application cookbook in the run list. That takes care of a lot of our servers, but we also have the self-managed Chef organizations. Essentially, everyone in the organization is an admin, or they manage it themselves, and these people have full read-write access. There's around 10 organizations that do this with around 50 nodes, 500 nodes. The full features of Chef are available. Some of these people use policy files. Some of these people are very advanced and do very creative things with Chef. The users move faster here. The read-only organizations pretty much is done to let us provision servers. This is but these single application organizations are where people do interesting things with Chef. Even here though, being able to find the admins using the applications is a good deal. So let's talk about how the demo API applications were set up. These API applications, even though they're demo, they make sense in the context of the environment at my company. I work at Nordstrom. Your company will have their own things they've always wanted to do, but probably couldn't. Using the Chef Server API may help. These examples are intended to show some of the possibilities and the demonstration codes publicly available, and you can use it for examples of techniques. The user management applications are something I want to help replace Chef Manage, which we plan to retire shortly. The demo apps are all Golang REST servers using Go Chef/Chef API client, talks to a Chef server. Login and authorization servers are stubs that imitate Okta and a REST service that gets authorization information. In my case, that would be from the ServiceNow configuration management database. Okta and ServiceNow are not hooked up to the demo code, though. These are just stubs that imitate that. Here's a diagram of the pieces and how this thing is set up. I start out with the Safari browser that you see that I'm running right now. Talk to Nginx. Nginx talks to external login support, or brings back requests from there to get me a JWT. I pass requests off to either the users, the organizations, or the nodes REST interfaces. These pieces talk to the external authorization part to make sure that you're allowed to do any of these things. And then they end up talking to the Chef server. You can see where the code is. If you want any of it, feel free to browse it, use it. It's open source. The create a user application. That should not be a Chef admin function. This demonstration replaces that function from Chef Manage. Chef Manage also has its own rules for creating usernames. I like a different style of username, and this gives us a chance to do that. Joining an organization, again, external authorization, self-service. This lets us find organization names, so you have a chance to figure out what you need to what you want to join. We can find organization admins if you need to ask somebody to invite you. Using the global endpoints, though, uses a lot of authorization, and this thing runs as Pivotal. You can create your own. We also can manage nodes. Person doesn't actually need to be a Chef user for some of the basic tasks, and you can also offload this to scripts that you run in batch things. Someone with no knowledge of Chef or the internal Chef organization could actually update these things. One of the options I didn't show you, but it'd be a simple one, is to just reset the user's private key. Without Chef Manage, I don't know any way that a user without a working private key can reset their own key. I don't want those calls. You could extend this function pretty easily to creating client keys for new nodes. And we already do something along those lines when we build new servers. You could manage Chef groups with this. We have a production application that does some of that. It's not part of this demo, but it's not terribly horrible to write. Let's talk about how to use the Chef Infra Server API. The API is divided into two sections. There are endpoints that hit Chef as a whole, and there are endpoints that hit organization endpoints. So if you looked at something like Chef server / users, that would be an endpoint that you would use to create a user that could be logged, could be added to any organization. There's a whole nother set of endpoints that are based inside of an organization. The Chef documentation makes that distinction, but it's not always clear. And occasionally bits and pieces of the API end up in the wrong section inside the documentation. And this is also the main point that confuses people when they use the API, because there's an endpoint documented as /users in the global documentation. There's also a /users endpoint documented in the organization's endpoint. You need to know what your prefix is which might include the organizations in the organization when you use this. This is a fairly basic API in general. Delete strings. Get will show you either lists of a class of object or show you details of a specific object. Post creates a new object. Put updates an object. Post and put tend to have JSON bodies passing information into the client. JSON information is frequently returned in the responses. URL parameters are almost never used. There's only a few cases. So example endpoint would be, you could do a post to organizations myorg/nodes. You would include a body that included the name of which node you wanted to create. It would take that organization, your JSON definition of the node that you wanted to create, and it would create the node. Get tends to say, hey, I want to get something out of a node, but you're going to specify the node name that you want in the URL itself. This API, Talking to Chef, uses request signing. You need to add credentials, lots of very specific headers. It's signed, they have signed fields, there's timestamps, there's RSA key processing. It's very picky. I suggest you use an API client. Don't write this code yourself. I just saw on Slack, somebody was asking questions about how to do this. Use the API clients. They do all this for you. This is an example of code that's inside the test setup repository that I have for this demo. We're saying, okay, create a client. It's going to be an organization client talking to the main app organization. And then create a new node called red005 that will have a run list, my book. That sets up the node JSON body inside of a Golang structure. And then we call the Go Chef client to actually create the node. Let's talk about what client packages are out there. Or let's talk about them a little bit. What do you gain by using an API client? Well, one of the main things is it sets up the credentials and packages the requests for you. That's painful. Having a client do it is a wonderful thing. It translates Chef objects to the specific language structures. So having the client unpack the Go code into, or unpack the JSON into a Go structure is much nicer than me trying to do something random to unpack JSON on the fly without knowing what the format already will be. Using the API is generally faster than Knife. Knife is using the API, but it covers all the bases and does a lot of checking. It's also Ruby. It's a little bit slow. I know Chef Inc. is using the Go Chef API client and Chef Analyze to speed things up a bit. I combine the API with caching in a database. I've got a MySQL one for some and a Redis database for some other stuff. That makes using the APIs really fast. There's all sorts of tricks you can use to speed this up, but some caching local to where you're going to go is really a nice trick. And that also cuts down on access to the Chef server. It is possible to write these API calls so that you bomb your server. You definitely might want to use some sort of rate limiting on these. Some of the available API clients, well, Knife, if you're willing to use a command line tool and process the JSON you get back from that as a API, technically is. That's what I used for years before I started working with this. The Knife exec API, get, put, delete, we'll call these endpoints. It'll also sign them and set stuff up for you. What it doesn't do is take the results apart for you cleanly. You know, you can get JSON back, but you still have to process it yourself. The Go Chef/Chef API is what I'm using for this demo. It's the only API client that I know that cleanly addresses the global level endpoints. Chef API is maintained by Chef. It's Ruby, nice. The RS Chef API, also maintained by Chef. I haven't looked at it. It's a Rust interface. And Noah's PyChef interface looks like it's 4 or 5 years old. So it's going to be missing a lot of stuff. But if you need Python, that might be a way thing to go, and you could probably extend it. If we look at the documentation for the API, I always remember that documentation is pretty much notes for how something worked for somebody at one time. Commercial documentation is usually taken from notes about 2 months before a product is released in a lab environment. And by the time it's actually written up after 2 months, the lab has changed drastically. The copy we end up seeing is usually 4 years old, and things have drifted. That applies universally to all technical documentation, not just chefs, but everything. So you always have to be a little suspicious about what you're doing. I always find the documentation using the Chef Server API keywords. There are missing pieces. There's a few of the endpoints that aren't documented. Some of the ones that have been introduced over the last 3 years are notably missing. I'm working right now on a pull request for policy and policy group documentation, for instance. Some of them haven't been updated for a while, but most of them are actually pretty complete and accurate. And there's people doing a fair amount of work to get them up to date. The team working on Chef Analyze is updating them nicely, and generally they're pretty useful right now. Doc doesn't include anything like a Swagger definition though, so you're going to be trying to use examples to figure out what you're going to get back and what you can pass in. The Go Chef/Chef has working client examples of every endpoint that it supports. So that's definitely where I would go for examples. If we look at the documentation pages, let's go there. You can see the index over here. They tell you how to set up the headers. Then they have global endpoints. Global endpoints are things like how many licenses do I have? What organizations do I have? Who are the users? And users get and post. Get will show you a list of all the users. Get under users/name will show you details for one user. Post to the user's endpoint will let you create a user. Put to a user's specific user will update that user. All of the endpoints here pretty much work that way. One thing to note though is that we have a user's endpoint here under global endpoints. And we have a user's endpoint here under organization endpoints. They're very different. This user's endpoint lets you add a user to an organization. This user's endpoint lets you add a user. They do very different things. You need to know where you are. Even though these things look like they're containers, it's really /organization/organization name/containers. That definitely confuses people when they use this. Summarizing a little bit. Chef Manage deprecated. It's driving a fair amount of this work. It provides functions that aren't available any other way. And we can use the API to replace the functions we care about. Each organization is going to have their own problems. The applications I've shown, they solve my problems. You'll probably be able to use this to solve your problems too. Nordstrom uses a version of the groups application right now. Implementing the rest of these in production got held up by COVID-19. A few people I'd like to thank. Jesse Nelson wrote GoChef/Chef with some help. There have been some recent contributors to GoChef. The Chef Analyze team has been doing a lot of nice presentations. Mark Anderson and Steve Dana helped me figure out where things were inside Chef and how to figure out what the endpoints were. Kimberly Garmo and Ian Mattis helped a lot with the documentation. They're great. They're the go-to people to help you with getting documentation updated. And I suggest if you find problems, please update the documentation. Mandy Walls and Benny, sorry about the typo there, were very helpful in helping get this presentation even done and going. Sous chefs are incredibly great people. I recommend if you want to help support external open source cookbooks, it's a great group to join. Nordstrom gave me an opportunity to work on this, and the PCM team will get a virtual toast out of me. And thank you all for watching and listening. I appreciate the time. Some links. First one's where the documentation is. Good place to go read it. Second one is the code that supports that documentation. You can go in there, find the API doc, and update it. Submit pull requests. Please do. The Workstation Knife Exec link shows you how to sign requests. It's a good resource for that. GoChef/Chef is the API I used for all of this work. The Chef API is the Ruby interface. The next two are interesting parts of the Chef server itself. Chef Pedant is the set of tests that actually run against, that Chef runs internally against the API to make sure it works. Great place for examples of how to code any of this. And the last link is actually the Erlang code that implements a lot of the API. That's where I go to try to figure out what endpoints and how things work. I wish I understood Erlang better. My code, first link is where the slides are. Chef server sets up my test Chef server. It's running it in a Vagrant image. Client is the very useful interface into calling the API. That's actually where all the hard work runs. The client nodes, client organizations, client users are the applications themselves. Login and node auth are the external authenticators and authorizers. Test setup uses the API to build all the demo objects. And the website is, by most people's standards, unspeakable. That was my first website. I've never done this before, so you're welcome to write something good and send it back to me. Thank you. And that's it. Appreciate your time.
That was great, Mark. Thank you. Unspeakable websites are absolutely my favorite. We have a couple questions in the Q&A panel, so we'll start there. Anonymous would like to know if you have any plans to leverage the Chef Automate 2 API calls instead of Chef Server API. I don't know what's changed under the hood there, but there's a lot of different stuff coming in Automate that Some of
I
it
haven't
is
seen
recording.
I haven't seen anything in Chef AP Automate 2 that would do what I'm doing. It might exist, but I don't know about it if it does.
I think it's still coming. I think some of that stuff's still on the roadmap for the future for that stuff.
Yeah, I was supposed to get a talk from Chef about what was coming up on Automate 2 so we could coordinate this a little bit. I never got that, unfortunately. So I'm not really up on what new stuff's coming out on Automate 2. So
We'll just have to make that happen then.
yeah.
Next one, we've got, I don't know enough about using the API to ask intelligent questions, but I wanted to say thank you for showing what's possible. That's great. Yeah, thanks very much, Mark. This was really
You're
in-depth
welcome.
stuff. So overall, like you guys have, obviously Nordstrom's been using Chef a very, very long time. You kind of have this unique setup. Like I'm not sure that we have a lot of other customers kind of using that sort of global view the same way you are on the older chef server stuff. Like when did you guys start sort of taking this tack with this approach with using the API this way?
About a year ago.
Okay, so fairly recent then.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Any other questions from the audience out there? A lot of folks still there. This is your chance to ask the man who has dug under the hood here. So, all right. Well, you guys know where to find Mark. You know where to find us. You can join the community Slack if you haven't already to ask more questions and see how things get going. Oh, here we go. Here's one more. With the remote work situation and giving your use of local testing using Vagrant for cookbook testing, how you test cookbooks that have integration points on your corporate network? Are you even doing remote work right now that way?
Basically when you test using Vagrant, you're not testing integration points with your corporate network. That even when we're on site, that just doesn't really happen. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think there's a few other sort of methodologies for like stubbing things out and like adding that to your libraries and your FOHI and other bits and pieces that way to sort of just give you stubs.
Yeah.
I don't have it at my fingertips.
For instance, we integrate with Active Directory a lot. We create local users for testing in Vagrant. So usually we'll have a fixture cookbook that creates a local user instead of having an actual call to user that's in Active Directory.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Alrighty. Well, folks, thank you for joining. If you would like to review this video another time, because there's a lot in here, it will be available on the on-demand platform starting June 2nd. So if you haven't registered for ChefConf, please do that at chefconf.io. Thanks for joining.
Thank you all.